Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be going over my reading statistics for the year 2021. Now, as I'm filming this, it is November 2022, so maybe I'll even manage to get this edited and published before 2023. Who knows? I do things early. But even if I am doing it super late, I still like keeping track of statistics for all the books I read. I like kind of seeing how my reading patterns change and just being aware of them. It's cool to see what's happening, and then I can also be aware of maybe some things that I want to look at changing in the future. So this year, I read approximately 118 individual books. And 28 of those books I reread, like I read them once and then read them again in the same year. So I finished a book 146 times this year, but there were only 118 individual books. So all these statistics will be based off of the number 118, which I think my Goodreads might have been at 119. It's hard to keep everything straight, but this is what I did in my individual spreadsheet. So of those 118 books I read, 86 of them were brand new books. 28 of them were brand new books that I then read again in the same year. And 4 of them were books that I had read previously in years before this one that I then read again this year. So my reread from past year's number is pretty low, but my books that I read twice this year is high. And I'd like to have a high rereading number because that means I'm reading books that I really enjoy and that I'll want to revisit. So I'm very happy with that. For age range, they were pretty much all adult. 111 of them were adult, 7 of them were young adult, and I did not read any children's books. And so I did not have a very diverse reading year. I pretty much picked one genre and read that whole genre all year, which I will get to later. But it was just mostly all the same age range this year, and that's fine. And the genre I read this year was romance. 95 of the books that I read were contemporary romances. I was just in the mood for something really light and happy, and I love books that have a happy ending and that make you feel joy while you're reading them. Mostly when I read books, it's because I want to feel happiness and I want to explore the world from another character's perspective, and these were just great characters whose heads to live in, and so that's what I was in the mood for this year. I also read 1 science fiction books, 9 high fantasy books, so that's a book set in like an old-timey like Lord of the Rings style setting. I read 4 urban fantasy books, so those are books kind of set in our world where magic happens to exist. I read 1 magical realism book. I read 7 mysteries or thrillers, and then I read 1 nonfiction book. So the focus was definitely on romance, but I did read a few other things sprinkled in here and there. So looking at whether a book was in a series, I have 3 categories for this. I have just a regular standalone book, I have a traditional series, and then companion books. And those are the ones that take place in the same universe, but they don't follow like a super chronological set of plot points, and you can read them out of order. It doesn't really matter. They'll probably have different protagonists, and a lot of romance novels are written that way. So 87 of the books I read were companion books. Those are probably pretty much all romance novels. They're just all in the same universe. Some of the characters know each other, but they're pretty discrete books in that universe. Then 18 books were true series, where like you need to read one book and then the next book to kind of follow chronologically what happened. And 13 of the books were standalone books that were not part of a series. Okay, so this statistic I am really proud of. I did not read any brand new books this year, and I don't think I even bought any brand new books. I did buy some used ones at book sales, but the books that I read this year, 3 of them I already owned, 1 of them I physically borrowed from the library, and 114 I digitally borrowed from the library. So that is great for my finances, it's great for the planet. I'm just very happy that I was not consuming a whole bunch of brand new books and that I was using existing books that already lived in the world. Next up, we have the country that the author of the book is from. And I'm from the United States. Most of the books I read were by authors who are from the United States. But I did read 6 books by authors from the United Kingdom, 5 books by authors from Canada, 6 by authors from Australia, and 1 from Poland. So I'm glad that I have a few other countries in there, but I would like to expand this list. I would like to include more non-westernized countries, just have a bigger variety, just because it's nice to see the world from other people's perspectives, and I would like a little bit broader of a range. Next, we have original language of the book, and this is similar to country of origin. I just think it's good to experience books written by different people from different places, and I did not do great at that this year. I read one book that was a translation. That was, I believe, one of the Witcher books. Everything else was originally written in English. And then the format of the book. I almost exclusively listen to audiobooks. It's great because I can listen to them while I'm commuting, I can sew, I can be doing all kinds of other things while I listen to books. Plus, that way they are free from my library. I just listen to the audiobook. That way I don't have to pay anything. I did also read 8 ebooks, which I also can download from the library. It's just, ebook is my least favorite form of book. It just doesn't have the magic that a paper book does or the convenience that an audiobook does. But sometimes books I like will only be available through ebooks. So that's how I did those. And then I read 4 traditional paper books, which is the lowest I think I've ever read in a year. But yeah, mostly audio now. And then publication date. You can see that most of the books I read were from the 2010s. Quite a few were from the 2020s, which was not, it's like a 2-year range. And then a few trailing the decades back, and nothing before the 1980s. So I had a very modern year this year. Next, we have gender of the author, and this is really interesting to watch as it changes from year to year. This year, most of the authors I read were female. 98 of the books I read were written by female authors, and that is something I'm really glad I kept an eye on, because a lot of the romance novels I read were male-male romances, and I'm a little uncomfortable with how much this little subgenre is kind of written by people who aren't the characters on the page. And so there's the danger there of kind of co-opting someone else's culture and using it because the group telling the story is not the group who are being represented by the story. So that is something definitely to watch. I read 13 books by male authors. I read 2 books that were written by a combo of authors, male and female mixed. And then I read 5 books by non-binary authors. And I am so proud of myself for this. This was something I wanted to fix from my 2020 statistics, I believe. Is that my genders were all like split. There weren't any like non-binary ones. And so I'm really glad that I opened that up, and I want to continue to read more diversely. Gender of the protagonist. This one I don't really care about changing. It's just interesting. 105 of the books I read had a male protagonist, 9 had a female protagonist, and 4 had a mixture of male and female. And so that statistic paired with the mostly female author statistic just means it's something that I should keep an eye on and be aware of what I'm consuming. So I believe that reading books should be a social activity. I like sharing it with people. So I did not really do that this year. I did not finish any books for a book club. I did not read any books with a boyfriend or with any other social group. I read 1 book with my mom, and the rest I read completely by myself. So now I'm going to go through my Goodreads statistics page. This is just a little bar graph that shows the number of books I read each month since I started Goodreads in 2013. And you can see that I've read quite a bit more as the years have gone on. I think since I've discovered audiobooks, I just have them on all the time as I'm doing other things. And it's just kind of fun to look at that little curve and see how it changes. Then I have pages read each month since I joined Goodreads, and this graph is pretty similar to the number of books read. It just spreads out a little bit more and it has less discrete entries, but it's pretty much the same shape of graph. This chart shows the number of books that I have read each year. Ignore 2013 because I joined Goodreads at the end of that year, so that's not actually the total number of books I read that year. But you can still see that this is my biggest year for number of books read. This is the most I've read by far. Trailing behind it was 2017. I read 113 books. This was definitely the most books I've read, and I do not need to try to bump up the number of books I'm reading because I am reading plenty of books. And then pages read each year. So this was still my highest year for pages read, but not by as much. So that tells you just kind of that the books I read this year were shorter than the ones I read last year. And then I love this scatter plot that shows the years that each book was published. And you can see that for a while I was had them really spread out. In about 2018, I was reading books from a whole bunch of different publication times. And in the last couple years, I've started reading way more contemporary books, and my little dots are clustered much closer together. So that's just kind of interesting to note. So those are my reading statistics for the year 2021. Normally, I would say that they're a good point to build off of and see what my reading habits should be for 2022, but 2022 is almost over. So I'll be filming the next video, hopefully in just a couple months, and I won't wait until the year's almost over like I did this year.